We are now going to talk about React. React is a JavaScript library that allows you to build complex user interfaces. It's mostly used to build single-page applications, which is something we'll cover later in this course. Truthfully, React is a massive library with various features. It's something that deserves a course of its own. I won't be able to cover every little thing. I highly recommend checking out a course dedicated to React on Udemy. The purpose of these next few lectures is to give you a light introduction to this library. Luckily, you don't need to know every little feature to develop plugins for Gutenberg. The team behind Gutenberg have already taken care of the heavy lifting. Just like everything else in WordPress, you just call a few functions and you're set. You don't even need to know React to get started with Gutenberg development. However, I believe having an overview of things will make you a better developer. Everything I show you here will be enough to make you comfortable with Gutenberg development. Right now, I'm on the official React site. Everything you want to know about React can be found here. Right on the homepage, you'll find a link to a tutorial. I recommend checking out this tutorial once you finish this section. In the resource section of this lecture, I provide a zip file with some starter files. Download it and unzip the contents. Let's review the files. First up is the webpack.config.js file. This is pretty much the same thing we had before. We will be working inside the app directory and the final results will be saved inside the dist directory. Lastly, I'm loading the Babel module. Next, let's open the package file. Everything is the same except for three things. Inside the dependencies object, I'm loading three modules called React, React DOM, Babel Preset React. The React module is the core of React itself. React is split into multiple modules. This way, we're not forced to use everything at once. This is basically the only required module if you ever use React. The React DOM module is responsible for displaying your HTML and working with the HTML document. This used to be a part of the core, but since React's inception, the library has grown to accommodate various scenarios. You can use React for creating mobile and desktop applications. In these cases, it may not be necessary to use the React DOM module. For this course, we will be interacting with the HTML document, so we'll need this module. The Babel Preset React module will make sure any React-related code also gets processed. We'll need to add this to the .babelrc file. Open this file and add the React preset. You can also set babel-preset-env to env. This is the shorthand version of that module. That's basically it. We don't have to worry about configuring Webpack since Babel will take care of loading the modules required for React. We don't need to install any special modules for those libraries. Alright, let's open the command line and run the command npm install. This will install the modules inside the package file. Make sure your command line is pointed to your directory before running the command. Hopefully, everything was installed successfully for you. Next, let's open the index.html file. This file is pretty basic. I'm loading a script file named bundle.js, which currently doesn't exist. That's perfectly fine. We'll be adding it later. Right now, I want to focus on one thing. For this example, I want to display a list of people. Inside the body tag, I'm going to create a div tag with the ID people. Then I'm going to create a list of people. I'll do this quickly. So I have a couple of div tags with the class person. Each person has a name and age. It's pretty straightforward. The problem with this is that we're constantly rewriting the same thing. Right now, we have 2 people, but can you imagine how much code this would be with 50 or 100 people? It would be disastrous. Since the HTML is all the same, we can use something React calls components. Components are reusable HTML elements. That's an oversimplification, but just keep going with me here. If you were to look at any web page, then you can break it down into components. The header, content, sidebar, and footer can be broken down into components. The advantages of using components are pretty clear. You can reuse them, which can make your code look a whole lot cleaner. To get started, open the app directory. You'll find a file called index.js. Currently it's empty. To create a component, the first thing we need to do is import React. We can name this import whatever we want, but once again, it's common practice to name it after the module name. The module is available inside the node_modules directory. This is why we don't have to pass in a /. Webpack and Node are more than capable of finding the package for you. We're going to create a function called person. When it comes to components, you must name your components with uppercase letters. I'll explain why in just a moment, but let's keep moving forward. Inside this function, I'm going to return some HTML. I'll grab the HTML from the document like so. Alright, let's stop here for a moment. You'll notice that I'm not surrounding the HTML with quotes. This is what's called JSX. JSX stands for JavaScript XML. It's a way to allow you to write HTML in JavaScript files. You have to surround your HTML with a pair of parentheses though. If you put your HTML all on one line, then the parentheses are optional. Since we have multi-line HTML, then it's required. Another thing I want to note is that I've completely emptied out the div element since we'll be loading this through React. This function is pretty straightforward. If it's called, then it'll return the JSX. The JSX isn't ready though. One of the drawbacks of using JSX is that some attributes may not work as expected. For example, the class keyword can't be used. In HTML, the class attribute is used to assign classes to an element. However, in JavaScript, the class keyword is used to create objects. This is a conflicting problem. To get around this, React provides an alternative. Instead of class, change this to class name. This will do what the class attribute does. This doesn't apply to all attributes. I'll be sure to let you know which attributes work differently throughout this course. This is also why we uppercase the function name. Lowercase letters indicate that the element is a regular HTML element, while an uppercase letter indicates that the element is a component. This is common practice among developers. Moving on, I now want to call this function so I can display the JSX inside it. To do that, we'll need to import the React DOM module. Remember, the React DOM module will take care of working with the HTML document, so we'll need it in order for this to work. Below the function, I'm going to call the render function from the React DOM object. This function will take care of displaying your JSX on the browser. It requires two parameters. The first parameter is the component that will display the JSX. You may be tempted to call this function like so, but that's the incorrect way of using it. This function wants to render an element, so we'll have to pass in the component like an element. I'm going to create a self-closing tag with the person component as the element name. The second parameter requires the name of the element on the page that will contain the rendered JSX. I'm going to use the div tag with the ID people. I'll just use some old-fashioned JavaScript to select this element. That should do it. Let's run the command npm start. After running this command, open your browser to view the page. You should see the person being displayed without a problem. Check the console for any errors as well. There shouldn't be any. Just like that, we've created our very first React application. It wasn't too hard. Let's review what we did. Inside the file, the very first thing we did was import some modules. Something you'll notice is that we didn't bother using the React module. However, that's entirely not true. Even though it's not written anywhere, it does get used in our code. I'm going to paste in some code really quick. Inside the person function, I've commented out the JSX. Instead, I'm using React to create the elements. You don't have to do this, just watch. I'll explain more in just a moment, but let's see if this works. Inside the command line, input the commands npm start. Then, I'll refresh the page and I'll see the name outputted once again. It may seem like there are two ways to generate HTML, but it's actually all the same thing. JSX is first and foremost JavaScript. Even though it looks like HTML, this code will be interpreted as JavaScript. Babel will convert this into the code below. React has a function called createElement. As the name suggests, this will create an element. There are three required parameters. The first is the name of the element. I passed in the div tag. Then you need to pass in the attributes. If your element doesn't have any attributes, then you can set this to null. In this example, I'm setting the class name property to person. Lastly, you need to pass in the content. I'm actually passing in another createElement function. You have to do this if you want to have nested elements. This time, I'm creating an h1 tag with the text Jack. Other than that, the rest of our code is the same. JSX is JavaScript. It looks like HTML, but it will eventually be converted to the code I have here. You can already see the benefits of using JSX. It makes our code look readable and manageable. This is why I'm teaching you React. When we start working with Gutenberg, you have the option of using JSX or these functions. Right now, our example is pretty simple, but can you imagine the code we'd have to write for 10 elements? Writing it like this is not wrong, but you do make it harder for yourself. I highly encourage you to use JSX when creating plugins for Gutenberg. I'm going to comment this out and then uncomment my JSX. Moving on, this function will only create the person element. The next step is to render it on the page. To do that, we use the render function. We pass this in as JSX and then we tell it where to display that element. That's all there is to it. I recommend you play around with this a little bit. In the next lecture, I'll go over a couple more things before we move on to Gutenberg development.